Chapter 1. The Beginning of Destiny. I failed again. This game is way too hard to beat with the Valyrians. I always lose because I mess things up myself. Aegon's eyes were bloodshot as he stared at his phone screen, where a bright red box had popped up. Game over. He was playing a multiplayer dungeon game called Destined Godblood. As the name suggests, Destined Godblood requires players to raise and continue their own house. Survive for 1,000 years in the world, and you win. The game's description even claimed that players would ascend to godhood upon completing the game, though Aegon always took that as a joke from the developers. While the game supported multiplayer, Aegon had always treated it like a single-player campaign, because he was dead set on clearing it. Being a die-hard fan of Game of Thrones, and sharing the same name as a historical figure from its world, Aegon always chose to play as the Valyrians from A Song of Ice and Fire. Among the Godblood players, the Valyrians were considered the most difficult house to clear. That was because Valyrian dragonlords came with a unique trait, true dragon blood. True dragon blood. Charisma +2, fire resistance increased to 80%, spirit resistance -50%, 50% chance to tame a magical dragon and become a dragon knight. The Valyrians could ride terrifying dragons and were practically a dominant force in the world of ice and fire. But their greatest strength was also their downfall. The problem lay in spirit resistance. Simply put, the Dragonlords of Valyria had extreme personalities and radical thinking. It reminded Aegon of the Uchiha clan from an anime he'd watched, each member a potential case of dissociative identity disorder. People said that whenever a Valyrian Dragonlord was born, the gods would flip a coin to decide if they'd be great, or mad. Over the past few days, as Aegon had been grinding, his house had been filled with all kinds of bizarre characters, violent maniacs, cowards, nerds, religious zealots, drunks, lunatics, scumbags. But occasionally, there would be a few rare standouts: wise men, heroes, sages, knights, great leaders, and master politicians. Some family members had all the good traits. Others, every bad one imaginable. Whenever an entire generation was full of negative traits, the house would teeter on the brink of extinction. Aegon had restarted the game hundreds of times, but none of his runs had lasted more than 100 years. I'm not giving up. One more try. This time, I'm going to make it work. Gritting his teeth, Aegon tapped on Write the Destiny of the House. Honored high-dimensional player, welcome to the Divine Multiverse. Please select the planet where your clan will reside. Aegon swiftly tapped the search box, typed in A Song of Ice and Fire, and confirmed his choice. You will be born at a random point in this planet's timeline, where you will either found a family among your people or join an existing one. From there, you'll determine the future of your house. Starting with the second generation, you will become the family's guardian, watching over their growth and guiding them through dreams. However, this dream guiding ability comes with limitations. The game camera zoomed in rapidly from the star-filled cosmos until it focused on a vibrant blue planet. Ethereal silhouettes of various species floated into view. With just a glance, Aegon saw well over 1,000 different races. Your race. First Men. Andals. Rhoynar. Ironborn. Valyrians. Yi-Tish. Valyrians. Aegon checked the box without hesitation. The race you've selected resides on the Valyrian Peninsula on the continent of Essos. Known for their silver gold hair and purple eyes, these features are unique among the peoples of the world. Based on your selected race, you now have a chance to roll for your true dragon blood level. A 6-sided die appeared on the screen. Each face of the die was marked with a different bloodline tier: None, Mixed Blood, Dragon Blood, Dragonseed, Dragonborn, Dragonlord. Aegon tapped the die. It spun for a few seconds before settling on Dragonborn. True Dragon Blood, Dragonborn. All Dragon Blood effects increased by 50%. Not bad. It's not Dragonlord level with a full 100% bonus, but taming a magical dragon shouldn't be a problem. No need to reset the account. I'll stick with this one. Aegon gave a slight nod. The noblest Valyrians were said to possess an extraordinary, some would say inhuman, beauty. You are one of them. Your true dragon blood far surpasses that of the Valyrian commoners. Please select one of the 40 Dragonlord families to serve as the source of your bloodline. House Valorys, House Targaryen, House Eddarian, House Elannis, House Orion, House Valentine. House Targaryen. Aegon chose Targaryen without a second thought. With a name like his, how could he choose anything else? Born of blood and fire, nourished through winter and spring, congratulations, you've joined House Targaryen. Talent draw. Please choose one of the following talents as your gift. E rank. Safe landing. You will be born safely. E rank. Good swimming. You won't drown. D rank. Bioengineered. You have a strong immune system. S rank, alien chip. I've made it this far on my own. E rank, low blood pressure. Your family won't suffer from heart disease. C rank, fertile. You or your partner are likely to conceive twins, or even triplets. D rank, alluring. You possess an astonishing beauty that some consider unnatural. Aegon's eyes locked onto one talent immediately. It was S rank. He hadn't expected to get such a god-tier start, randomly landing on a top-tier talent. Excited, he quickly opened the detailed description for alien chip. Chip functions. 1. You can view the attributes of characters or items you explore. 2. You can consume energy destiny to deduce skills and knowledge. 2 abilities powerful enough to alter fate itself. With the ability to view character stat panels, he could choose the most capable family member to lead when it came time to pass down the mantle. And the deduction function, that was the ultimate cheat for climbing the tech tree. I'm going with the alien chip. Before your arrival, you were lucky enough to be chosen by the remnants of a pioneer civilization's legacy, receiving a quantum chip capable of rewriting the fundamental code of the material world. ZZZZT, hum. The moment Aegon confirmed his talent, his phone began to emit a strange noise and heat up. The game interface glitched, the screen blooming with static. Blue code filled with unknown symbols cascaded down like a waterfall from the top of the display. Warning, warning. The game program has been invaded by unknown code. Super-dimensional firewall interception failed. The space-time gateway has been breached. Program encryption defenses compromised. Initiating Destiny Timeline Correction Program. 10, 3, 2, 1. Restoration complete. Functions back online. Loading backup data. Aegon frowned. Had the game just been hacked? Should he keep playing? Was there a chance his bank info might get stolen? While he hesitated, the game interface returned to normal, and a selection window popped up. What is your profession? Unsullied. Mime. Disabled veteran. Street vagrant. Slave. Poacher. Merchant. Aegon gave a soft, huh. Why were all the options garbage this time? He'd restarted over 100 times and had never seen such a lousy starting lineup. It felt like the game was trying to get him to quit. There was even a slave option. How could anyone build a family with that? You'd be lucky just to survive. And the Unsullied? That was a trap. In Game of Thrones, the Unsullied were eunuch slave soldiers. Picking that would be instant game over. No legacy, no family, no future. Could it be related to the S-rank talent? Had he burned up all his luck on that pull? Aegon paused, thinking it through. You don't want me to play. I'll play anyway. Trying to scare me off. Not happening. Out of the 7 options, at least, Merchant wasn't terrible. Merchant. Lock it in. Customization complete. Transmigration countdown. 3, 2, 1. Boom. A loud explosion rang out as Aegon's phone suddenly blew apart. A deep rift in space ripped open, flashing with blue light. Aegon's soul was swept up and pulled into the void, vanishing without a trace. ... The Valyrians were originally a small civilization of mostly pastoral people. That changed when they discovered dragons and their nests in the volcanic ring known as the 14 Flames on the Valyrian Peninsula. They learned to raise and tame dragons, and soon turned them into weapons of war, terrifying and destructive. With the power of dragons, the Valyrians expanded their reach and established the Valyrian Freehold, with Valyria itself as the heart of their dominion. During this era, the Freehold reached the peak of its power, stretching across most of the Essos continent west of the Bone Mountains. Countless cities were linked by the wide and imposing Valyrian roads. Valyria, the capital of this vast dragon empire, was a city of towering black stone structures. These towers were vast geometric monoliths, cold, imposing, and visually overwhelming. Their rooftops were intricately carved into the shapes of dragons, and massive dragons regularly soared above the city. Looking down from a dragon's vantage point, the streets below bustled with life. People of all races and in varied attire wove through the crowds. Especially in the commercial heart, Merryx's Square, where throngs of people jostled shoulder to shoulder. When the shadow of a dragon passed over the square, no one panicked. It was clear the people were long used to the sight of dragons stretching over 100 meters in length. Beside the square stood a 3-story spire-roofed tower, home to the Merchant Guild, Dragon's Treasure. Dragon's Treasure was a mid-sized guild specializing in the slave trade. They operated between the Freehold and the continent of Essos, transporting both goods and slaves, with a fleet of over a dozen large trading ships. The guild's owner was the bastard son of a Valyrian dragonlord, which gave the guild certain connections within the ruling class of the Freehold. But recently, disaster struck. One of Dragon's Treasure's ships was attacked by a sea monster and sank, leaving no survivors. The guild's finances were shattered, and now it stood on the brink of collapse. In the meeting room of the stone tower, a massive oak table stood at the center, with 4 chief stewards positioned on either side. At the head of the table sat a silver-haired man, Aegon, the master of the merchant guild. He had both hands placed on the table, palms pressed together, his forehead resting against them as if in a meditative doze. Today, the stewards of the guild had gathered for 2 purposes: to discuss the next shipment bound for the continent of Essos, and to find a way to replenish the guild's working capital. Sunlight slipped quietly through the gaps in the window, casting a bright white beam onto the silver-haired man. Under the light, his hair glowed with a soft metallic sheen, gleaming like strands of silver wire. Aegon slowly raised his head, revealing eyes like polished amethysts. A few locks of hair fell across his forehead, and the contours of his face were as sharply defined as if sculpted by a master artisan, his jawline strong and resolute, his complexion pale as snow. He held back the excitement rising in his chest. What had looked like sleep was actually him receiving the game's customized memories. In a matter of seconds, Aegon had fully absorbed the common knowledge of this world, an astonishing feat. He never imagined that playing a game would actually lead to transmigration, but the system panel before his eyes confirmed the truth. He had entered the world of the game-destined godblood. In this new life, he was the bastard son of Anar, the patriarch of House Targaryen, and the eldest son of the family. However, after the birth of Anar's legitimate son, Jaeman, and due to inheritance disputes and Jaeman's mother's open dislike of Aegon, Anar had sent him away early in life to be raised by a wealthy merchant. That merchant, Aegon's adoptive father, had recently died of illness. Now, as his legal heir, Aegon had just inherited the Dragon's Treasure Merchant Guild. After organizing the background memories in his mind, Aegon pulled up his game attributes. Name: Aegon. Nation: Valyrian Freehold. House: Targaryen, bastard. Politics: 80, strategy, 80, military strategy, 80, mental strength, 80, vitality, 80. Talents: S-class, alien chip, true dragonblood, dragonborn. Skills: Valyrian common, proficient, business, basic, chemistry, basic, politics, basic, Chinese, proficient, marks. Destiny points: 0. Items: none. Destiny points can be used for draws. Every 100 destiny points grants 1 draw. A 10 draw guarantees at least a green quality item. He recalled the game's final Easter egg: completing it allowed players to ascend and become gods. In this world, maybe that wasn't just fiction. The possibility made Aegon take this transmigration very seriously. He rose to his feet and straightened his back, then reached into his robes and drew out a Valyrian steel ring coiled with a dragon design, sliding it onto his thumb. The 4 chief stewards watched the young man solemnly. It was clear the meeting was about to begin. All 4 stewards were in their 40s, middle-aged men, yet none showed the slightest impatience with Aegon's long silence. This was because the Valyrian Freehold enforced a 3-tiered slave class system. The top tier was citizen, who had voting rights, the right to be elected, and the right to conduct business. The second tier was commoner, who lacked political rights but retained personal freedom. The third tier was slave, who had no personal freedom whatsoever. All 4 stewards were second-tier commoners. Only Aegon, as a citizen and the master of the Merchant Guild, held the rights that allowed Dragon's Treasure to operate within the Freehold. Aegon lowered his gaze to the oak table, a symbol of authority within the guild. His eyes followed his left hand as he slowly moved it across the table, feeling the grain of the polished wood beneath his fingertips, smooth, detailed, and unmistakably real. That tangible sensation was proof enough. This world was no illusion. Then, turning his head, he followed the movement of his right hand and laid it on the tabletop as well, adopting a commanding posture, just as the original owner had in the inherited memories. Aegon lifted his head, and from beneath the shadows, his violet eyes gleamed with unhidden ambition. Suddenly, he rapped his knuckles twice against the oak table. Thud, thud. 3 comments 0 vote. Chapter 2. Failing at trade, I had to become a dragon rider. The 2 knocks echoed like the trigger of a loaded crossbow, sharp, decisive, and impossible to ignore. Without hesitation, the 4 chief stewards bowed deeply to Aegon. My lord, master. 3 voices followed in unison. Next came the guild's formal loyalty ritual. The 4 stewards had long been stationed in different corners of the world, each overseeing a specific branch of the guild's business. It was rare for them to all gather in one place. This was Aegon's first time presiding over a meeting since inheriting the guild. In accordance with tradition, the 4 stewards were to swear their allegiance to him, affirming their loyalty to the guild's new master. One by one, they approached Aegon. He turned slightly, raising his right hand, the one adorned with a Valyrian steel ring carved with a dragon motif. The Yetish steward stepped forward respectfully and kissed the ring. In a low voice, he swore, "Your loyal servant and follower, Bruce, is at your command." "Merixes bears witness to our covenant," Aegon replied, his tone still slightly stiff. Merixes was the god of commerce worshipped by the Valyrians. The other 3 stewards followed in turn, each swearing their allegiance to Aegon. Ding! A soft chime sounded at the lower left corner of Aegon's vision, as a prompt appeared on his game interface. "Congratulations on inheriting a minor faction. You've received a beginner's bonus. 1 free reward draw is available. Would you like to draw now?" "Yes," Aegon responded mentally, controlling the interface with a thought. Blue quality item obtained. Blood Orchid times 10. The game program will distribute rewards in stages. Participate in and influence major historical events to earn destiny points and rare items. Item quality ranks from lowest to highest: white, green, blue, purple, and gold. Please find a wife as soon as possible, produce offspring, and begin the main destiny quest. As a veteran player, Aegon was already well versed in these mechanics. In this game, only by collecting items could one hope to clear every stage. A house couldn't possibly last 1,000 years through realism alone. But the matter of producing heirs could not be delayed. Now that he had truly transmigrated into the game world, dying here might mean actual, irreversible death. However, if he left behind blood descendants, he could become a spirit of the house, forever bound to its legacy. At the moment, Aegon was in the middle of a meeting with his stewards, discussing the future of the guild. After quickly navigating the panel, he closed it without hesitation. "My lord." Noticing Aegon's brief distraction, Bruce looked up to prompt him. As the steward in charge of accounts and finances, Bruce held the most influence among the 4. Aegon nodded slightly, raised his hand, and said calmly, "Take your seats, all of you. Let's talk about the guild's current situation." Bruce and the others stood, gathered their long robes, and moved to sit along the sides of the square table. Aside from Bruce, who bore the distinctive features of a Yetish, the other 3 stewards were Tarber, responsible for sales in the free cities, Ramon, in charge of slave procurement from Essos, and Marek, who was stationed at the Freehold managing the collection of cod, whale oil, weapons, and other goods. "My lord, ever since that spice ship sank unexpectedly, the guild's operations have come to a halt. We're on the verge of bankruptcy." Bruce was the first to speak again. "We have no funds to procure supplies, and all 10 of our merchant ships are just sitting idle in port," Marek added bitterly. Aegon rubbed his forehead, sweeping his gaze over the group before focusing on Tarber and Ramon. "What about you two? If there are issues, let's hear them now." Tarber shook his head. "Without goods arriving in the free cities, I can't do anything. After the spice ship disaster, we defaulted on our deal with the big merchants in Pentos. If we keep failing to deliver, we'll lose that trade route altogether." Ramon sighed. "Same here. No money means no way to buy slaves. I came back from Marine because of the funding issue." Aegon turned to Bruce. "How much capital do we have left?" 320 gold coins, Bruce replied, summarizing bluntly. "Not even enough to fill the hold of 1 ship." Tarber suggested, "What if we take a loan from the Dragonlord Treasury, use it as our base capital?" The Dragonlord Treasury was a bank run by the ruling Dragonlord family of the Freehold, handling investments and loans. "Those loans are all usurious," Marek interjected. "1 round trip could go entirely to paying back the interest." A heavy silence settled over the room. In truth, there was one significant asset no one had yet mentioned: the very building they were sitting in. This 3-story black stone tower, spanning over 1,000 square meters, stood in the bustling Merixes Square. It had once been the ancestral home of Aegon's wealthy foster father. And now that the Freehold had become a dominant power in the world, the value of the property had skyrocketed, several hundredfold. "Why don't we mortgage the Dragon Treasure Tower too?" Tarber looked toward Aegon, speaking hesitantly. "No." Bruce, sitting stiffly in his chair, cut him off before he could finish, slamming his hand on the table in firm objection. "That property belongs to the Lord. It can't be used for public affairs," Marek added in agreement. Aegon remained calm, fingers interlocked, elbows resting on the armrests as he sank into thought. These 4 stewards, on the surface, they seem loyal. One plays the hardliner, another the peacemaker. Tarber, the head of sales, and Ramon, who manages the slave trade, are pushing for loans and mortgages. Marek, in charge of procurement, and Bruce, the financial officer, oppose them and act like they're on my side. But none of them has actually offered a real solution. It feels like they're setting up a trap, trying to steer me straight into it, Aegon calculated silently. He decided to shift the focus. "Let's not rush any decisions. I want to personally assess the guild's assets before making any moves." Tarver looked like he was about to object, but Aegon shot him a sideways glance, and he held his tongue. Let's talk about what's been happening in the city lately. Any major events? I'll find a way to resolve the guild's financial issues. Don't forget, I come from the House of the True Dragons, Aegon said, reassuring the room. Marek, the head of procurement, was the first to respond. There's word that a dragon dreamer has emerged in House Targaryen. It's said they've foretold a great event, but the dragonlords have sealed off the details. Marek, stationed in Valyria to handle goods procurement, was the best informed among them. From his customized memories, Aegon knew that his identity as a Targaryen bastard was unknown to the four stewards. He, of course, knew of the infamous doom of Valyria, an apocalyptic disaster of mysterious origin that shattered most of the Valyrian Peninsula and brought down the Valyrian Freehold after 5 millennia of prosperity. It had all started with a prophecy from a Targaryen dragon dreamer, prompting the family to flee to Dragonstone with 2 of their vassal houses. That Marek, a guild steward, had caught wind of this before Aegon, a Targaryen bastard, made it clear that his connection to House Targaryen had long since been severed. This is important. Go on, Aegon said, nodding slightly. Besides that, Marek continued, in 1 month, the Freehold is holding a dragon taming competition. Many with true dragon blood are already returning to Valyria. I've heard that recommendation slots for taming have skyrocketed in price on the black market. Aegon fell silent, recalling the long-standing Valyrian tradition of dragon taming. Over thousands of years, the Freehold had developed strict protocols to contain and control magical dragons. According to the Freehold's Dragon Taming Act, only those formally recommended by a member of a true dragon house were allowed to tame a dragon. Even then, those noble families had only a limited number of recommendation slots. Anyone who attempted to tame a wild dragon without permission would be hunted down by all the true dragons of the Freehold once discovered. The Dragon Taming Act existed to prevent the spread of dragons beyond the Freehold's control. After thousands of years, the blood of the dragonlords had become widespread. On the Valyrian Peninsula, bastards like Aegon were countless. If every one of them tried to claim a dragon, it would threaten the dragonlord family's rule. This law functioned much like the nuclear non-proliferation treaty from Aegon's past life, designed to maintain the Freehold's supremacy and strictly enforced for generations. I want to participate in the dragon taming, Aegon said, lifting his head and announcing firmly under the gaze of the entire room. Up to 20 chapters ahead for now. Patreon.com, BlurryDream. BlurryDream creators' thoughts. 6 comments 0 vote. Chapter 3. The Choice of House Targaryen. The conference room fell into a brief silence. Bruce was the first to break it. He leaned forward slightly, speaking in a calm tone, we don't have any dragon taming slots. A single slot on the black market now costs over 100,000 gold dragons. I'm afraid, we'd have to sell the Blackstone Tower just to afford one. Aegon considered this, it was indeed a difficult problem. But then he thought of House Targaryen. At this moment, his half-sister, Daenerys the Dreamer, had already foretold the coming of the doom. The family should soon begin preparing to evacuate the Valyrian Peninsula. Although House Targaryen was at the bottom of the Dragonlord families, it still held the right to recommend candidates for dragon taming. The Dragon's Treasure Guild had ships, and if House Targaryen was planning to relocate, perhaps he could leverage that to seek their help. His status as a bastard might just be the key to opening that door. No need to worry about the slot. I have my own way, Aegon said calmly. Marek, the procurement head, quickly chimed in with a warning. Even if you manage to buy a slot, the odds of success are minimal. The dragon lairs in the 14 Flames are all controlled by the 40 Dragonlord families. Without their maps, you won't even be able to find the dragons. Those so-called taming slots on the black market, they're just a scheme by the Dragonlords to cash in. The other 2 stewards looked like they were about to speak up as well. Aegon raised a hand, cutting off Marek's chatter, and reiterated firmly, my family carries Dragonlord blood. We have strong ties to the Dragonlord families. Think, how do you suppose the Dragon's Treasure Guild has been allowed to operate in the Freehold? With those words, Aegon stood, his gaze moving to the wall. He reached out and took down a whale oil candle. In his customized memory, Ramon smoked often, so Aegon walked over and gestured for Ramon to light the candle. As the flame flickered to life, Aegon calmly extended his hand, holding it directly above the fire. True dragons do not fear fire. The 4 stewards widened their eyes, stunned as Aegon exposed his hand to the flame without flinching. Shock crossed their faces. But within moments, their eyes drifted back to Aegon's otherworldly appearance, and a subconscious calm washed over them. They silently concluded that their lord must possess a very high concentration of true dragon blood. Aegon placed the candle in the center of the oak table, turned back, and sat down. Leaning into his chair, he said evenly, "Rest assured. Once I've successfully tamed a dragon and am registered as a true dragon in the Freehold, I'll register all of you as my vassals. You'll be granted first-class citizenship." A true dragon referred specifically to a dragon knight, an elite status even more privileged than first-class citizens in the Freehold. The four stewards exchanged glances, silently weighing countless thoughts. If the guild had a dragon, its influence within the Freehold would increase dramatically. True dragons also enjoyed tax exemptions and held various privileges across Freehold colonies. And Aegon had just promised to elevate all four of them to first-class citizen status. Ramon was the first to respond, sitting up straighter. "I support your decision to enter the dragon taming competition." "I agree," Marek added, raising his hand quickly. Tarver followed suit. "No objections here." Bruss hesitated, his eyes flickering briefly, but eventually gave a small nod. Aegon stood, clapped his hands lightly, and offered a faint smile. "Good. Then Marek, I have a task for you." Marek immediately turned his attention to Aegon. "At your command." Aegon gave his instructions. "Keep an eye on any information related to dragon lairs in the 14 Flames. I need to find a suitable dragon. In the Freehold, dragons are divided into 3 ranks: beast dragons, true dragons, and dragonlords. I need at least a true dragon." Marek bowed slightly. "Understood." Aegon then looked to Ramon. Ramon smiled. "Yes, my lord." Aegon nodded and said seriously, "I need a woman, chaste, preferably with true dragon blood. Keep an eye out in the slave market." Ramon reminded him in a low voice, "My lord, trading in dragonblood slaves is illegal in the Freehold." Aegon nodded lightly. "Just find one for now. We'll deal with the rest later." Ramon asked, "How soon do you need her?" "As soon as possible." Ramon gave a small nod. "Understood." None of the 4 stewards found Aegon's request unusual. After all, the Valyrian Freehold was a slave state, and for a wealthy noble to keep several concubines was hardly out of the ordinary. "If there's nothing else, you're dismissed," Aegon said with a wave of his hand. The 4 stewards stood, bowed in unison, and filed out of the conference room. Once alone, Aegon exhaled deeply. Dealing with those men had truly worn him out. He began tapping his fingers rhythmically against the tabletop, thinking to himself. The matriarch of House Targaryen, the mother of the legitimate son, Jaeman, harbors a deep grudge against me. Given the current situation, the priority should be finding a way to ease tensions with Anar, head of the Targaryen family. His eyes gleamed faintly. He had an idea. Aegon drew the quill from the leather sheath at his waist, picked up a sheet of parchment from the table, and laid it flat. He dipped the quill into the inkwell, then began writing, awkwardly, on the parchment. Line after line of high Valyrian script scrawled across the page, looking like a child's messy handwriting. Before long, he had completed a letter. It began with polite formalities and ended with a note saying he would visit the next day. Aegon set down the quill, gently blew on the ink to dry it, and carefully folded the letter. Then he looked up and raised his voice to call for a servant. Before long, a servant in plain clothing arrived in haste and stood respectfully at the doorway. Aegon beckoned him over, and the servant quickly stepped forward. Aegon handed him the letter and instructed solemnly, "Deliver this to House Targaryen immediately. Make sure it's handed directly to someone in charge." The servant accepted the letter with both hands, bowed, and replied, "Yes, my lord," before turning and hurrying out of the room. With everything now settled, Aegon finally remembered the newbie reward item he had drawn. He hadn't taken a proper look at it yet. With a thought, he opened the details for the item. Blood orchid. Item. Blood orchid times 10. Type. Consumable. Quality. Blue. Rating. 35. Effect. Works on organic lifeforms. Stimulates genetic mutation, unlocking the upper limits of genetic code. Note. Please be quiet and stop messing with the little cells. Aegon studied the description and was struck by a strange sense of déjà vu. It felt like something he'd seen in a movie before. He slowly opened his palm, and in an instant, 10 blood-red orchid blossoms appeared out of thin air. Items drawn in the game could be stored in the game's item space, which was remarkably convenient. With a flick of his wrist, Aegon returned the blood orchids to the item space. Now wasn't the time to use them, especially given the mention of genetic stimulation. Who knew what side effects they might have? He rose and walked over to the window, gazing out over the bustling scene below. From his vantage point, he could take in the entire square at a glance. Outside, the plaza was packed with people, a constant flow of movement and voices. In the center stood a towering sphinx, like an ancient guardian. Carved from a single massive boulder, its muscular lion's body seemed to pulse with raw strength, majestic, powerful, and unyielding. It radiated a kind of futurist aesthetic that impressed Aegon. He couldn't help but admire the view. The tower, passed down from his adoptive merchant forefathers, really was in an exceptional location. The sightline was beyond anything he could have imagined. Behind the Blackstone Tower stood a small extinct volcano, several dozen meters tall. It, too, was part of the Aegon family's estate. The land couldn't grow crops, the air around it was hot and oppressive, like being inside a giant steamer. Aegon let his imagination wander. If Valyria weren't doomed to destruction, perhaps he could divert some water here and develop a geothermal hot spring. Making it Valyria's first luxury resort wouldn't be a bad idea. Just then, a thunderous roar shattered his thoughts. He looked up, and saw a colossal dragon, at least 100 meters long, tearing through the sky like a war machine, blotting out the sun as it roared over the square. The beast's body was cloaked in flame-colored scales, as if forged from molten magma. Its massive, fearsome head was studded with jagged, crown-like horns, glowing crimson in the sunlight. Its gaping jaws bristled with knife-like teeth, gleaming and uneven like a mouthful of cold steel. The creature's wings, like enormous red sails, were supported by thick, powerful bones that stretched the wing membranes taut. Each beat of its wings stirred a violent wind that kicked up sand and dust across the square below. Aegon instinctively raised his hand to shield his eyes from the sun and stared unblinking at the rider seated in the dragon's saddle, his eyes filled with envy. He clenched his fist. I will have a dragon like that, no matter what it takes. ... House Targaryen's ancestral estate lay just outside Valyria, nestled in a vast expanse of rolling hills. The current generation of the Dragonlord House Targaryen was small in number. The patriarch, Anar Targaryen, had done everything he could to expand the family, marrying multiple wives and taking in many concubines. Yet, after decades, he had only 3 children to show for it. The eldest, Aegon, a bastard, was gifted and intelligent from a young age. But due to issues of succession, Anar had sent him away early in life to be raised under the name of a wealthy merchant. The legitimate son, Jaeman, was cheerful and bold, with the makings of a true heir. The second daughter, Daenys, was sharp-minded yet quiet by nature. From a young age, she displayed rare and unusual talents. She was born a dragon dreamer. In the Freehold, dragon dreamers were a rare and revered existence. They referred specifically to those of true dragon blood who could foresee the future through prophetic dreams. But recently, Daenys had a vision that left Anar deeply troubled. In her prophetic dream, Daenys witnessed a horrifying vision of the Valyrian Peninsula's destruction. She described it to her father. The sky turned blood red. Waves of searing flame swept across the land like a raging tide. The entire peninsula was blasted into the sky with a deafening roar. Smoke billowed endlessly, blotting out the sun. The once glorious freehold vanished within a single day, reduced to ashes and nothingness. When Anar, heavy-hearted, reported his daughter's prophetic dream to the Dragonlord Council, it initially caused a great stir. He was summoned to the council hall to face questioning by the 14 Dragonlord councillors. But in that grand chamber, the Dragonlords looked at the head of House Targaryen with sneers and scoffs. To them, such a nightmarish prophecy was nothing more than wild fantasy. The freehold is thriving, powerful, how could it possibly fall to ruin in a single day? Remember, the Valyrian Peninsula is vast. It spans nearly half the continent of Essos. Even in the Age of Heroes, the demigods of legend with their supernatural might couldn't destroy a land this immense. Though dragon dreamers were rare in the Freehold, the sheer number of true dragon bloodlines meant that nearly 5 known individuals possessed prophetic abilities. If your daughter's vision is real, Anar, why have none of the other dragon dreamers seen the same thing? Voices of doubt echoed through the massive hall, wave after wave crashing down on Anar. He stood alone at the center of the chamber, surrounded by skeptical gazes, feeling like a hunted beast slowly roasting over flame. You're just trying to use your daughter's dream to elevate House Targaryen, scheming to worm your way into the Dragonlord Council. Utter delusion. Though his heart was burning with anger, Anar had no way to argue back. His lips trembled, sweat beading on his forehead. He looked like a scolded child who had done something wrong. Among the true dragon families, House Targaryen was not particularly strong, but Anar himself possessed a dragon of Dragonlord potential, Valyrian. It was precisely because of this that House Targaryen was considered the most likely candidate to earn a seat in the Dragonlord Council. But now, that very potential had become the reason he was met with suspicion. And so, under the pressure of the 14 Dragonlords, the council declared Daenys' prophecy false. They moved swiftly to suppress the information, issuing a stern warning to Anar. Spreading doomsday fearmongering would bring severe consequences. Anar flew down from the 14 flames atop Valyrian, a look of bitter defeat on his face. His heart weighed heavy as lead. Though the council had dismissed his daughter's vision, Anar's faith in her remained unwavering. Upon returning to the family dragon pit, he handed Balerion over to the dragonkeepers, instructing them to feed him well with cattle and sheep. Then, without pause, he returned to his estate. If he could not change the minds of others, then he would prepare his family's future himself. House Targaryen would not sit around waiting for death. No, Anar had already made up his mind. He was going to take his entire family and leave. 1 comments 0 vote. Chapter 4. I believe in green dreams. Anar immediately summoned his steward and issued an order to liquidate all of the family's properties in the freehold and the lands of the long summer as soon as possible. In the months that followed, House Targaryen's string of unusual actions drew the curiosity and attention of many factions. No one had ever seen a dragonlord family selling off their own castles, let alone something as vital as the dragon pit, the very foundation of their lineage. The Targaryens had gone mad. Speculation and rumors ran rampant. Some well-informed individuals managed to uncover the reason behind Anar's behavior, but when they heard about the prophecy foretelling the destruction of the Valyrian Peninsula, they scoffed in disbelief. That day, Anar sat in his study, going over the accounts. Though our family isn't considered powerful among the dragonlords of the freehold, these assets are more than enough for House Targaryen to establish a new kingdom abroad. This wealth could well serve as the foundation of a nation. A steward in a long black robe stepped up to the doorway, standing respectfully with a letter in hand. Come in, Anar said, glancing up briefly before returning to his accounts. Master, Lord Aegon has sent you a letter, the steward said, presenting it with a respectful demeanor and upright posture. Anar took the letter, opened it, and read through it. After reading, he let out a soft sigh. Child, I didn't expect that after all these years, you'd become the head of a guild. Ha. Anar fell into brief contemplation. Then he tossed the letter to the steward and said calmly, arrange a meeting for tomorrow. The steward bowed slightly. As you wish. ... The next day, warm sunlight poured gently into Aegon's room. Standing before the wardrobe, he chose a striking ceremonial robe in bold black and red tones from among his many garments. After putting it on, Aegon adjusted the hem and collar in front of the mirror. His silver hair flowed smoothly, gleaming with a cool sheen in the sunlight. Just past 20, he stood tall and lean, radiating the vigor and confidence of youth. Just then, the sound of the coachman calling to the horses came from outside the window. Aegon took a deep breath and strode out of the room. The carriage was already waiting at the door. He gave the coachman a slight nod, then stepped aboard. Leaning back in his seat, Aegon silently contemplated the upcoming meeting. Truth be told, he didn't have many cards to play. It was uncertain whether he could win over House Targaryen. With a shout from the coachman, the carriage slowly began to move, the wheels making a steady clattering sound on the stone-paved road. Aegon gazed out the window at the bustling streets. People came and went, and shop signs swayed gently in the breeze. As the carriage rolled farther away, the noise of the city gradually faded into the distance. After a while, the grand castle of House Targaryen finally came into view. Aegon stepped down from the carriage and looked up. The castle sprawled over thousands of square meters, with towering spires rising 100 meters into the sky. On the massive black stone walls, the banners of the freehold flapped fiercely in the wind. Aegon couldn't help but marvel. House Targaryen truly is formidable. Even if they're not the strongest among the dragonlord families, to the outside world, they're still a giant. Just as he was about to walk toward the castle gates, an elderly man in a black robe, clearly a steward, came forward to greet him. Lord Aegon. The butler greeted him with a smile and gave a polite bow. Aegon nodded slightly. The master is in the castle today. Please follow me, the butler said, raising his hand in invitation. He led Aegon through the long corridors of the castle and eventually brought him to a reception room to wait. Moments later, the steady sound of firm footsteps echoed from outside. A middle-aged man clad in a magnificent robe embroidered with dragons stepped confidently into the room, the black-clad butler respectfully following behind. Aegon immediately recognized the man who bore a faint resemblance to himself. This was his biological father, Anar. Aegon stood with a smile, gave a courteous bow, and greeted him politely. My lord, it is a great honor to see you today. According to freehold customs, a bastard was not allowed to address his biological father as father or dad. This spared Aegon the awkwardness of calling a stranger by such intimate terms. Anar gave a slight nod, then slowly looked up, taking a good look at Aegon. The man before him had both presence and striking features. So many years had passed in the blink of an eye. If not for the traces of his childhood features still lingering on Aegon's face, Anar might not have recognized this young man as his own flesh and blood. What brings you back to House Targaryen? Anar walked steadily to the seat at the head of the room and sat down with composure. I've come for myself, Aegon answered openly. Anar's brows furrowed slightly. He said nothing, simply watching Aegon in silence, thinking to himself, Jimin's mother would never agree to let you return to the family. This boy is good looking, but how capable is he, really? Aegon continued, I inherited my adoptive father's guild. Not long ago, one of our merchant ships, fully loaded with goods, was struck by disaster at sea. Everything on board was lost. The guild is now on the brink of bankruptcy. Anar's frown eased. Only now did he realize he had misunderstood Aegon's intentions. So, you're here to borrow money? Aegon gave a slight shake of his head. Anar looked puzzled. Then why have you come? I heard about Dany's prophetic dreams. The Valyrian Freehold is doomed. Now that House Targaryen is selling off all its assets, I assume you're preparing to leave Valyria. Anar chuckled inwardly. This was the first time he had heard of someone actually believing Dany's dreams. You believe her ramblings? Aegon nodded with grave seriousness. I believe them without a doubt. Oh, then do you intend to leave Valyria with House Targaryen? Aegon shook his head. I'm just a small-time merchant. I don't have much to my name. If I wanted to leave, I could go at any time. Anar grew visibly impatient, tapping the armrest of his chair. Enough circling around. Just say what you came for. Aegon gave a straightforward reply. I want a recommendation to become a dragon tamer. Anar let out a cold, mocking laugh. Even if the family leaves the Valyrian Freehold, it still falls under the Freehold's jurisdiction. Except for the legitimate heir at birth, who gets a single free chance to hatch a dragon, all other training spots require official recommendations, granted only through contribution to the Freehold. Those spots are extremely rare and valuable. Why would I help you get one? Aegon now fully understood. There was little familial sentiment between them. Speaking with Anar felt no different than a business negotiation. There was no trace of the affection that ought to exist between father and son. The air between them was cold and distant. In the end, it came down to offering something of real value. My guild still owns 10 large dragonhead paddle ships. All of them are at the family's disposal for free, to help with relocation. Anar considered this. It was certainly something he needed at the moment, but he still shook his head. Not enough. Aegon had little left to offer, but he pushed forward anyway. If this didn't work, he would have to give up. I also own a 3-story Blackstone tower. You know what real estate is worth in the capital of the Freehold, especially in such a prime commercial district. Anar lowered his head in thought for a moment, then once again shook it. Still not enough. Aegon let out a heavy breath, his brows furrowed, his face full of disappointment. Looks like I was too naive. I thought a bit of knowledge about the future would be enough to influence people like this. Then I won't trouble you further. He gave a shallow bow and turned to leave. Anar watched Aegon's departing figure, lost in thought. He's sharp and methodical, living up to his reputation as an early bloomer. At least he still holds some goodwill toward House Targaryen. If we're going to found a kingdom overseas, we'll need real dragon power. If his bloodline is strong enough. With that thought, Anar spoke to Aegon's back in an even tone. If you're willing to swear fealty to Jimin, I'll grant you the recommendation. The words of this dragonlord hinted at a desire to keep Aegon. Aegon paused mid-step. He understood immediately. Anar's meaning couldn't be clearer. He wanted Aegon to explicitly renounce any claim to the headship of House Targaryen. One step at a time, he thought to himself. Aegon turned to accept, but Anar raised a hand to stop him. First, we test your bloodline. If you've got the talent to tame dragons, then we'll talk. But if you're not a true dragon, applying for the tournament will be a waste of everyone's time, Anar said calmly. Aegon nodded in agreement and walked over to the wall, holding his hand over the candle flame. Anar stood up and smiled. Some resistance to fire only means you have dragon blood. But to be a true dragon, your blood must at least reach the level of Dragonseed. Come with me, we'll go to the dragon pit for the test. The dragon pit? What kind of test? Aegon muttered, but seeing Anar already striding out the door, he could only follow. If you'd like to support my work and unlock advanced chapters, you can follow me on Patreon. Up to 20 chapters ahead for now. Patreon.com, BlurryDream. BlurryDream creators' thoughts. 3 comments 0 vote. Chapter 5. Dany's the Dreamer. Aegon and Anar left the main keep where the reception hall was located. As they walked through the stone-built corridors, sunlight streamed in light golden threads, casting a warm glow across the winding stone floor. Aegon couldn't help but look around curiously. Everything felt so new. Towering medieval spires and massive stone dragon sculptures loomed around them like spiritual monuments. After all, he had only transmigrated into this world 2 days ago. The drastic change in environment still left him feeling slightly out of place. Not long after, the sharp sound of shouting and clashing weapons echoed from up ahead. Aegon looked up and saw a spacious training ground, surrounded by many warriors. In the center, a young man and woman were fully focused on sparring, their long swords clashing in bursts of metallic ring. The young man seemed to notice Aegon, Anar, and the steward approaching. With ease, he deflected the girl's sword and raised his hand to signal a pause. He gave his wrist a subtle twist, spinning his blade into an elegant flourish before reversing his grip and walking to the edge of the training ground. A bright smile on his face, he called out curiously to Anar. "Father, where are you going?" At that moment, Aegon realized this young man had to be Jaeman Targaryen. When Aegon had been cast out of the Targaryen family by his mother, Jaeman had only just been born. Naturally, he wouldn't recognize his older brother. Aegon's first impression of Jaeman was that of a cheerful, energetic young man. His short golden hair looked crisp and tidy, and his square-shaped face gave off a strong, upright aura. To the dragon pit, to test the concentration of his true dragon blood, Anar replied calmly, turning slightly to glance at Aegon. His expression was stern, carrying the air of a strict father. He made no mention of Aegon's real identity, and Aegon, picking up on the cue, didn't say anything either. There was a kind of silent understanding between them. The girl quickly walked over, about a head shorter than Jaeman. "Can we come too?" she asked sweetly. "Yeah, my sister and I haven't tested our bloodline either. Let's go together," Jaeman suggested to Anar. Aegon's eyes fell on the graceful young woman. She had large, pale violet eyes, shimmering with a watery gleam that made her look irresistibly endearing. It was nearly impossible to turn her down. Anar's expression softened noticeably when he looked at his daughter. "You two can come as well. Aegon wants to join the dragon taming tournament, maybe you'll be teammates. This will give you a chance to get to know each other." "Yay!" Daenerys cheered, pumping her tiny fist in excitement. Taking the opportunity, Anar leaned closer to Aegon and said in a low voice, "All legitimate children of our Dragonlord family are given a chance, as infants, to request a dragon egg from the Dragonlord Council to be placed in their cradle. But these two both failed to hatch theirs. This tournament is their last chance." Aegon listened and gave a small nod. The siblings, still clad in the leather training armor they had worn, jogged over to join them, their steps light and eager. Aegon gave a slight bow and said politely, "My name is Aegon. It's a pleasure to meet you both." Jaeman stepped forward without hesitation, reached out his hand, and gave Aegon a firm handshake. With a hearty grin, he said, "I'm Jaeman. Around the Targaryen hills near the capital, if you run into any trouble, just drop my name, I've got your back." "Ha ha. Then I'll be counting on you in the future," Aegon replied with a gentle smile, thinking to himself how appearances truly reflected personality. This guy was definitely the straightforward type. As soon as Aegon clasped Jaeman's broad palm, he activated his chip talent and began scanning his stats. Jaeman Targaryen. Attributes, Politics. 56. Strategy. 46. Military Command. 75. Mental Strength. 43. Vitality. 96. Talents. Strong arms, courageous, inbred, true dragonblood, dragonseed. Skills. Aegon took a quick glance and then closed the panel. He had to admit, Jaeman's dazzling stats were impressive. He was clearly a highly specialized warrior, and a vitality score of 96 was staggering. Back in the Three Kingdoms era, he could have gone head-to-head with Liu Bu in sheer strength. Beside them, Daenerys looked a bit shy. She clung tightly to her brother's arm and said softly, "My name is Daenerys." Aegon smiled warmly. "Lady Daenerys is very beautiful." Her cheeks flushed at the compliment, and she tucked herself behind Jaeman. "She's always like this," Jaeman said fondly as he gently pulled her out from behind him. "A little shy around strangers, but she warms up once she gets to know you." Aegon nodded with a smile. Seeing she had no intention of shaking hands, he quietly set aside his curiosity about her dreamer trait, for now. Once everyone had introduced themselves, Anar spoke up. "All right, now that you've met, let's not waste any more time." At his prompt, the group began walking together toward the dragon pit. Jaeman was quite chatty along the way. From their conversation, Aegon learned that Jaeman and Daenerys were close in age. He was 3 years older than Jaeman, while Daenerys had been born just a year after him. She had only just turned 16. Jaeman's cheerful personality was on full display as he spoke excitedly about his admiration for dragons and his eagerness to participate in next month's dragon taming tournament. Aegon listened attentively, occasionally chiming in. The two hit it off well. Anar walked steadily ahead, and the sounds of their conversation naturally drifted to his ears. Hearing his children talking so comfortably, he felt quietly relieved. He'd originally been concerned that Aegon might be hostile toward his legitimate son Jaeman, but from how things looked, the two were getting along just fine, and that eased his worries. Daenerys remained a little reserved in Aegon's presence. She simply held onto Jaeman's arm and followed beside them quietly, listening to their conversation and occasionally responding with a soft, They followed a winding stone path, and as they walked, the surrounding scenery grew increasingly barren. A massive canyon loomed ahead, and inside, dozens of giant caves had been carefully carved out. Each was several stories high, with broad stone platforms in front, resembling helicopter pads from Aegon's previous life. The dragonkeepers tending the dragons noticed their arrival and stepped forward respectfully to greet them, leading the group into the dragon pit. Countless flickering ceiling-mounted candles lit the cavern, with torches placed every few meters along the stone walls. Together, they cast the entire space in a dim, shifting light. Strange pictographic runes were carved into the surrounding walls, so complex that even Aegon, who had some knowledge of High Valyrian, couldn't decipher them. A faint sulfuric scent lingered in the air. Even Jaeman fell silent once they entered the dragon pit. As they passed some of the branching paths, Aegon caught glimpses of massive black shadows, each several stories tall. Looks like the Targaryens have more than one fully grown dragon, Aegon thought to himself. The dragonkeepers led them deeper into the cave. The constant progression through the dark tunnels gave Aegon the surreal sense that they were adventurers delving into a dungeon, heading straight for a dragon boss. Eventually, they reached a colossal natural cavern. The space suddenly opened up, and countless stalactites hung from the ceiling. At the center stood a huge stone nest, and inside it lay a black dragon, nearly 100 meters long, sound asleep. Their arrival seemed to disturb the beast. It slowly opened its massive eyelids. A thin, lizard-like membrane retracted, and its vertical pupils locked straight onto Anar. "This is my dragon, Valyrian," Anar said, lifting his chin slightly as he met the creature's gaze. He's also one of the rare few in the Freehold with the potential to become a Dragonlord-class dragon. Aegon's jaw slackened slightly as he stared, unblinking, at Valyrian, the mighty beast known in his past life as the Black Dread. "This is the dragon of my dreams," he screamed inwardly. In the vast cavernous nest, Valyrian looked like a black mountain. His immense body filled most of the space, and his scales shimmered in the dim light, as if forged from the hardest obsidian. The sharp horns on his head jutted out like two black swords, radiating a chilling menace. "You're practically drooling," Jaeman teased, nudging Aegon with his shoulder and grinning. Daenerys covered her mouth and let out a quiet giggle. Anar turned to the three of them, clearly pleased by the awe in their eyes. "To test your bloodline," he explained, "you'll walk up the stone steps toward the Black Dread. If your true dragon blood is strong enough to tame a dragon, you'll be able to get within 10 paces of Valyrian." "No problem." Just as Aegon was about to step forward, Anar grabbed his shoulder. Aegon looked back, confused. "If your true dragon blood is too thin," Anar said solemnly, his eyes locked on Aegon's, "you'll be burned to ashes by Valyrian's dragonfire before you even reach 50 steps. Not even I could save you." He paused, then asked, "Are you absolutely sure you want to take this test?" Aegon gave him a brilliant smile. "I'd rather die than not ride a dragon." 2 comments 0 vote. Chapter 6. Turning force against force. Anar nodded slightly. "Go." Aegon turned and stepped onto the stone stairs, heading diagonally upward toward Valyrian's dragon nest. From the cave entrance to the nest was nearly 200 meters, and he climbed steadily, one step at a time. Soon, he was within 100 meters of Valyrian. The dragon seemed to sense this bold human approaching. Its head still rested at the edge of the nest, but its eyes shifted downward, watching Aegon draw closer. Aegon's gaze met the dragon's vertical pupils. He swallowed hard. The overwhelming pressure from the massive beast made his heart pound, but he didn't stop climbing. 100 meters. 70. 60. Aegon could feel the temperature around him rise sharply. He wondered to himself, are all dragons surrounded by such intense heat, or is Valyrian unique? 50 meters. At that moment, Valyrian stirred. It raised its head, a series of guttural rumbling sounds coming from the folds of its throat. Aegon hesitated for a moment, then kept moving forward. 40 meters. 30. Valyrian seemed irritated by the tiny figure daring to come close. It opened its mouth slightly and stretched its neck toward Aegon. Hanging in the air above the cave, its massive head, about the size of a car, lowered toward him. Aegon came to a halt. By now, he had completely forgotten about the so-called bloodline test. He looked up at Valyrian. It was the closest he had ever been to a dragon. His heart pounded like a drum. Slowly, he raised his right hand and reached up toward Valyrian. At the mouth of the cave. "Aegon actually wants to touch Valyrian," Daenerys said in surprise. At this distance, only the dragonkeepers who regularly feed him have ever gotten this close, Anar said, watching the interaction between man and dragon above. And to make contact with a royal class dragon that hasn't formed a mental link, this person might carry the true dragon blood of a dragonlord. Jimin turned to his father in shock. The dragonlords from the legends. The ones who could tame entire flocks of dragons. Anar nodded firmly. 1,000 years ago, one of our freehold ancestors tamed 3 dragons at once and formed spiritual bonds with all of them. That kind of person is a bloodline dragonlord. At the edge of the dragon nest, Valyrian's massive head slowly approached Aegon's outstretched hand. Just as it came within half a meter of his right hand, Valyrian suddenly opened its mouth, and searing black flames began to gather in its throat. A wave of heat washed over Aegon, turning his hand bright red. He turned his head slightly and squinted, speaking in High Valyrian to calm the dragon. Easy, Valyrian, easy. Aegon lowered his right hand and began slowly backing away, continuing to soothe the beast. Perhaps in response to Aegon's retreat, the dragonfire forming in Valyrian's throat gradually faded. It snorted, gave Aegon, now over 30 meters away, a dismissive glance, then retracted its neck back into the nest. Once Valyrian had fully calmed, Aegon took one last, reluctant look at the black dragon before finally turning to walk back toward the cave entrance. He lifted his right hand to check the burn. The skin had been seared red from the indirect heat, and 2 small blisters had already formed. Aegon let out a soft sigh. As he reached the mouth of the cave, Jimin walked up with a grin and clapped him on the shoulder. Not bad, kid. Anar gave his approval too. You passed the test. Your bloodline concentration is just shy of dragonlord level. You shouldn't have any trouble taming dragons. Aegon pressed his lips together and gave a small nod. Daenerys stepped forward and handed him a bottle, speaking a little shyly. This is the ointment I use when I get hurt during training. She pointed to the burn on his right hand. Just apply it directly to the wound. Thanks. Aegon smiled at her and took the bottle. It's your turn, Jimin, Anar said to his son. Yes, father, Jimin replied and started up the steps. Be careful, Daenerys reminded him. Jimin looked back with a smile. It's fine, don't worry. Aegon opened the bottle and applied the ointment as he watched Jimin's attempt. This time, Jimin walked steadily forward, and Valyrian showed no reaction at all. It wasn't until Jimin was within 20 meters that Valyrian let out a threatening growl, opened its mouth, and began gathering dragonfire. Valyrian, stop, Anar shouted, his expression tense. Under his master's command in High Valyrian, Valyrian ceased his attempt to breathe fire and looked at Anar with a hint of confusion. Aegon felt speechless. So Anar claiming earlier that he couldn't stop the dragon had just been a bluff. Maybe the man had wanted to test his resolve. Jimin stopped walking. He knew his test was over. Judging from the fact that he couldn't get within 10 meters of the dragon, his true dragon blood seemed even weaker than Aegon's. That was a tough pill to swallow, but only for a moment. He quickly let it go. He wasn't the kind of person to brood over things. When Jimin returned to the cave entrance, Daenerys stepped forward and gave him a hug to comfort him. Aegon took note and thought, these 2 siblings seem very close, closer than most relatives. Jimin, your bloodline concentration isn't high enough. If a dragon resists when you try to tame it, don't push it, Anar warned. I know, Jimin said with a carefree laugh. Then it was Daenerys' turn to approach. She walked toward the dragon nest step by step. To Aegon's surprise, Valyrian didn't react to her approach with any hostility. He simply watched her silently, as if observing this bold human with interest. Daenerys actually made it all the way to within 5 meters of Valyrian. After a moment, Valyrian seemed to grow weary of the human's antics. With a light sweep of his enormous tail, he knocked Daenerys to the ground. Then he turned his head away and ignored them completely. Seeing Valyrian's reaction, everyone understood that the bloodline tests were finished. When Daenerys returned, the group began heading back. Targaryen stronghold. In the study, Anar had called Aegon in for a private meeting. A maid had prepared a pot of richly fragrant red tea. After handing the teapot to the steward standing behind Anar, she exited the study and gently closed the door behind her. These days, the Dragonlord families don't just hand out dragon taming slots directly. There are some behind-the-scenes dealings involved. According to the Freehold's Dragon Taming Act, these slots can only be used by blood relatives of the family's main branch. Anar spoke slowly, lifting a cup of tea and taking a light sip. The black-clad steward stepped forward, one hand folded elegantly behind his back, and topped off Anar's cup. What do I need to do? Aegon asked. Anar shifted into a more relaxed posture, crossing one leg over the other. Then, with a snap of his fingers, he signaled. The black-clad steward put down the teapot, pulled a thick, metal-bound tome from the bookshelf, and placed it in front of Anar. Aegon sat up straighter, eyeing the strange book with curiosity. This is the genealogy of House Targaryen. It only records members of the main bloodline. This kind of record was created for the Dragonlord families by the blood mages of the Freehold using blood sorcery. The Valyrian steel cover bears enchanted runes, and once a name is recorded inside, it syncs with the blood scrolls kept at the 14 Flames. So, when a true dragonblood signs their name here, they receive the endorsement of a Dragonlord house and gain the right to use a dragon taming slot. Anar flipped the large book open, found a spot, and pointed. Sign here. We'll list your bloodline under my cousin, who died during an expedition over 10 years ago without leaving any heirs. You'll be registered as his posthumous child. This way, the lady of House Targaryen won't be suspicious. Not bad. I won't have to return to being Anar's bastard, but I'll still gain the status of a legitimate son of the main bloodline, Aegon thought. He nodded at Anar, signaling his agreement. The black-clad steward handed him a quill, then gently pricked Aegon's finger with a small knife, letting the blood soak into the tip of the quill. Aegon signed his name at the spot Anar had indicated. Ding! A game notification chimed. Congratulations! You've obtained the status of a direct descendant of a Dragonlord family. Normal achievement completed. Plus 100 destiny points. You currently have no bloodline descendants. The main storyline cannot be initiated. Please produce offspring as soon as possible. Aegon glanced at the system message in the lower left corner. The game's main storyline required continuing a noble house for 1,000 years. To do this, two conditions had to be met. The house had to be recognized by the world, and the player had to have living bloodline descendants. If the house still existed but the bloodline died out, the game would instantly end in failure. If descendants survived but the house was destroyed, it would also end. Both conditions were essential. Now that he had fulfilled the first, he still needed a son or daughter to continue the line. Aegon closed the system prompt with a thought and pushed the genealogy back to Anar. Anar checked it, then closed the book. The steward returned it to its place. Anar turned to Aegon, his expression serious. As you know, because of Daenerys' prophecy of doom, the entire Targaryen family is preparing to evacuate the Valyrian Peninsula. Right now, all dragons within the Freehold are under strict control by the Council of Dragonlords at the 14 Flames. Even dragon eggs laid by dragons of the Dragonlord families must be registered and documented one by one. In this situation, trying to take dragons with us out of Valyria will be extremely difficult. That's why we must strengthen ourselves as much as possible. For this dragon taming tournament, I've prepared maps of dragon lairs for the three of you, each one housing an adult dragon. This way, during the family's future migration, not only can you contribute to the house, but you'll also have the power to protect yourselves. I understand, Aegon replied. Anar was pleased with Aegon's insight. With the matter settled, he began to rise, ready to leave with him. Lord Anar, there's one more matter I'd like to ask your help with, Aegon said, standing as well. Oh, Anar raised an eyebrow, then sat back down. Tell me. Aegon poured him another cup of tea. It's like this, my trading guild's cargo ship was lost in a shipwreck. Now the guild's authority has fallen into the hands of 4 senior managers. I'm worried they might have been bribed by outsiders. Anar stroked his chin and sipped his tea. You suspect, the shipwreck wasn't an accident? Yes, Aegon said with a nod. He had only just arrived in this world and hadn't had time to cultivate loyal followers. But the Targaryens were now his allies, and they could be trusted. As a Dragonlord house, their resources and influence made uncovering the truth much easier. All right, I'll have someone investigate the shipwreck, and assign others to keep an eye on those 4 managers, Anar said, setting down his teacup. Thank you, Aegon said gratefully. Stay for dinner before you head back. There are many details about the dragon taming tournament I still need to go over with you. All right, Aegon agreed. If you'd like to support my work and unlock advanced chapters, you can follow me on Patreon. Up to 20 chapters ahead for now. Patreon.com, BlurryDream. BlurryDream creators' thoughts. 3 comments 0 vote. Chapter 7. Assassination. The northern district of Valyria City served as the gateway to the 14 Flames. The northern gate, towering over 100 meters high, was known as the Shield of Freedom. It held a special purpose, welcoming victorious armies returning from war. After a successful campaign, troops would enter from the southern Dragonlord Gate, march along the Dragonlord Road, pass through Merryx's Square, and finally arrive here, to be reviewed by the Dragonlord Council atop the 14 Flames. Atop the city wall, an old man in a blue robe, slightly hunched with age, leaned against the railing. To his left stood a middle-aged man in a deep crimson robe. He had a broad, square face and a thick beard, exuding an air of authority without even trying. Lord Limond, when I was coaxing Aegon to sell his estate, I think he sensed something off. He's starting to grow suspicious, the blue-robed old man said quietly. Now it seems the boys gotten in with House Targaryen. Limond scoffed. House Targaryen? Just a bunch of lucky fools who hatched a royal-class dragon. In the Freehold, the real power still lies with the Dragonlord Council. This involves a Dragonlord family, I'm afraid it might turn into a major incident. The old man furrowed his brow, hesitation in his eyes. He knew that if things went south, the Dragonlord families might discard him like a used pawn. Bruss, you old fool. Limond suddenly stepped forward, his large hand like a clamp as he seized Bruss by the collar and yanked him forward, growling through clenched teeth, I don't care what it takes, I'm getting that land. I'll deal with that little pest tonight. Afterward, just forge a deed of sale. That shouldn't be hard for you. Steward Bruss trembled with fear. And no problem. I'll get someone on it right away. It'll be done tonight. Get out of my sight. Limond barked, releasing his grip. ... Targaryen Hills. The main hall of the keep glowed with warm light. Elegant drapes swayed gently, and Anar was hosting a small banquet to welcome Aegon's return. No vassals of House Targaryen were present, only family members residing in the keep had gathered. Everyone sat around the long dining table. The mood was formal, but not rigid. Anar began introducing Aegon to the only two other surviving dragon-bonded members of House Targaryen. Both were from his father's generation, technically Anar's uncles, and Aegon had met them a few times in his childhood. Now returning under the identity of Anar's cousin's son, Aegon had to reacquaint himself with these familiar faces. With a mutual, unspoken understanding, everyone who recognized Aegon took care not to let Jaeman realize his true identity. As was typical at such gatherings, the wine flowed freely, and Aegon ended up drinking a bit too much. Because of that, Anar wasn't able to finish explaining the dragon taming precautions or let Aegon choose a dragon. He simply asked Aegon to come back tomorrow. After the meal, seeing Aegon slightly drunk, Anar had Jaeman escort him home. The Targaryen carriage rolled to a stop at Merrix's Square in the Western District. The rumbling wheels fell silent, breaking the calm of the square for a moment. Several vagabonds seemed startled and looked over. Aegon stepped down from the carriage. Jaeman leaned out of the coach and said kindly, "This is as far as I go, Aegon. Take care." "Thank you, Jaeman. Sorry for the trouble today," Aegon replied. Jaeman gave a small smile and shook his head, then looked up to draw the curtain. But as he did, he caught sight of the vagrants scattered across the square, and his brow slowly furrowed. It was past midnight. The square was dim and empty. Under the moonlight, Aegon noticed several figures sprawled on the ground, homeless men, it seemed, asleep in the open. Halfway across the square, a beggar bumped into him. Aegon immediately sensed something was wrong. He reached for his coin pouch, gone. His pockets were empty, but after fumbling around, he felt something unusual, a slip of paper. What's this? The sudden jolt sobered him up. He pulled out the note and unfolded it. Danger. Aegon looked toward his Blackstone tower, and noticed something was off. In the moonlight, there seemed to be far more vagrants than usual, and they were armed with swords. A chill ran down Aegon's spine. He forced himself to stay calm. Without a word, he tucked the note into his coat and came to a halt. I hope Jaeman's carriage hasn't left yet. Sensing that Aegon had stopped moving, the vagrants lurking nearby began to close in, forming a dense, shadowy mass. The dim lighting made it impossible for Aegon to count how many there were, but there had to be at least several dozen. He tried to move as naturally as possible and slowly began to turn around. But in that very instant, a hand axe came whistling through the air, narrowly grazing his cheek. Aegon broke into a sprint. Thank the gods, the Targaryen carriage was still there. Another axe screamed through the darkness. Aegon felt the hair on his back stand on end. Death was that close. In a flash of desperation, he remembered a tactic for dodging projectiles. He dropped to the ground and rolled sideways. The deadly axe missed again, embedding itself deep in the side of the Targaryen carriage. Just then, the Targaryen coachman charged forward from the front of the carriage, shield raised. Jaeman leapt out of the carriage as well, wielding a pair of gleaming short steel swords. He jumped down and sprinted toward Aegon. Lying on the ground, Aegon looked up at the two men rushing to his aid, and his chest swelled with emotion. He was nearly moved to tears. He pushed himself up and ran toward Jaeman. Whoosh, the sound of another axe flying through the air. Jaeman sprang forward, placing himself between Aegon and the threat. His twin blades slashed in a silver arc, meeting the incoming axe mid-flight. With two sharp clangs, he split it clean in the air. Aegon's eyes went wide with astonishment. That display of skill left him speechless. Jaeman glanced back and offered a small smile, then drove one of his swords into the ground at Aegon's feet and gave a slight nod, indicating he should take it. Aegon reached down and grabbed the sword, pulling it free with a sharp tug. To his surprise, it wasn't as heavy as he'd expected. Of course, his vitality stat was already at 80. He had strength to match. Jaeman now gripped his remaining sword with both hands, holding it upright before his chest as he prepared to meet the rush of attackers. He left Aegon with nothing but the solid, reassuring view of his back. Aliquo, Aegon, I'm trusting you to cover me, Jaeman said without looking back, his eyes locked on the approaching threat. We'll fight as we retreat. Understood, Your Highness, the coachman replied in a low voice, stepping to Jaeman's right to guard his flank. Aegon, heart pounding, dragged his sword into position and took his place on Jaeman's left. This was wild. On the second day after arriving in this world, he was already facing an assassination attempt. And now, a beast of a man was about to cut a path through a horde of enemies just to get him out alive. Aegon activated his talent chip and set a task. A flurry of blue lights flickered in his vision. Talent, alien chip. Combat mission engaged. Analyzing trajectories of all incoming weapons. Voice-assisted targeting enabled. Operation successful. Chip will consume 0.1 destiny points per second for the duration of the task. Suddenly, a sharp twang. The snap of a bowstring. Archer. On the left, Jaeman shouted. Aegon turned quickly in the direction of the sound but saw nothing. Talent. Alien chip. Target acquired. Arrow detected. Calculating wind direction and velocity. Computing trajectory. Simulating long-range arc. Please strike the red target in your field of vision. A red X appeared, speeding across Aegon's field of vision. He understood instantly, that was the chip's prediction of the arrow's path. Aegon swung his sword with all his strength toward the mark, the blade cutting through the air with a loud whoosh in a fierce, decisive strike. But he missed. Thwack. The arrow slammed into Jaeman's left shoulder. 1 comments 0 vote. Chapter 8. Fierce Battle. Jaeman gave his blade a sharp twist, and with a crisp swish, cleanly snapped the arrow shaft lodged in his shoulder. Then, using that momentum, he spun into a fierce, sweeping strike. His steel sword carved through the air with a rush of wind, slashing hard at the two assassins charging toward him. A flash of silver exploded in the dark like a crescent moon tearing across the night sky. Clang! The clash of metal rang out, sparks flying on impact. The two frontmost assassins had their weapons knocked clean from their hands by the sheer force of Jaeman's blow. At the same time, a deep gash opened across each of their chests. They screamed in agony and collapsed to the ground. Aegon, fall back and protect yourself. Jaeman's eyes were bloodshot as he held the line, shouting back without hesitation. Aegon clenched his jaw and followed closely behind, holding position at Jaeman's left rear. He'd almost turned and run just moments ago. After all, he'd been a desk worker for over 20 years. What experience did he have with life and death combat like this? The fact he wasn't frozen in place was already the limit of his self-control. But Jaeman had thrown himself into danger to save him. That thought alone made Aegon grit his teeth harder. If I die, I'm dying with Jaeman, he swore silently. Thwip. The sharp twang of a bowstring cut through the chaos again. This time, Jaeman didn't even need to warn him. Aegon instantly looked toward the upper left. His chip highlighted a red arrow target in his field of vision. You can do this, he urged himself on. Tightening his grip on the sword, he swung upward with all his strength, only to miss the red cross completely. His heart sank. He turned his head instinctively, just in time to see Jaeman twist his waist with sharp precision, narrowly dodging the incoming arrow. Thunk. The arrow embedded itself in the stone pavement nearby, its fletching still quivering from the force of impact. Sweat beaded on Aegon's forehead. He'd never trained with weapons like these. Hitting a high-speed target with a blade was simply beyond him. Enraged by the hidden archer, Jaeman let out a furious roar. Cowards! I'll show no mercy. He tore off his outer robe and hurled it toward the approaching assassins. The muscles in his arms rippled like coiled cables. His steel sword moved like a living serpent, slashing twice across the obscured assassins. One assassin caught the blade across the neck. His head snapped to the side and hung limp. Jaeman's ferocity gave the attackers pause, but only briefly. They quickly regrouped and began to spread out, trying to encircle the trio from behind and cut off their retreat. Even though Aegon couldn't land a hit on the fast-moving red markers, the chip's defensive prompts allowed him to barely hold Jaeman's left flank. Red lines lit up in his vision, showing where to block each attack. The three of them fought while steadily falling back. Aegon's gaze landed on the round shield in Aliquo's hand. Give me the shield. I can block the arrows, he shouted. Aliquo had just driven back another assassin. Hearing Aegon's cry, he didn't hesitate, he spun and hurled the shield toward him. Aegon caught the handle in one quick motion. They were nearly back at the carriage now. The hidden archer, sensing things turning against him, grew anxious and let loose a volley of arrows. Thud thud thud. The arrows struck with a series of harsh metallic clanks. But this time, Aegon had the wide shield to cover him. He blocked every arrow cleanly. Nice work, Jaeman called out with a glance, flashing a rare smile of approval. In the dark, poor visibility made archers the biggest threat. But now that Aegon had neutralized them, a huge weight lifted from Jaeman's shoulders. They fell back to the carriage, using it as cover. With their flanks protected, the assassins' encirclement had failed. Seeing this, the attackers hesitated. Jaeman's sword was Valyrian steel, ordinary blades would snap after a few clashes. Already, several of their comrades had fallen to his strikes. Just during their short retreat, nearly 5 assassins had died, every one of them cut down by Jaeman. The trio had earned a brief moment to breathe. What now? There's still over 20 of them. Aegon asked nervously, eyes darting toward the shadowy figures stalking the darkness. Jaeman flicked blood from his sword and gave a savage grin. What do you think? We kill them all. Hand me your sword. Seeing Jaeman's large hand reaching toward him, Aegon passed over the steel sword without hesitation. Jaeman took it, spun the long sword in his left hand with a practiced flourish, then reversed his grip. His right-hand sword remained in a standard grip, while the left-hand sword sat low and steady, ready for the next onslaught. Your Highness, it's an honor to witness your dual-blade swordsmanship. Aliquo, the coachman, was practically glowing with excitement, his voice brimming with barely contained enthusiasm. Aegon gripped his shield tightly with both hands. In that moment, it all clicked. So Jaeman hadn't handed me an extra weapon, he's a true dual wielder. By taking one of his swords for protection, I'd actually weakened him in battle. Kill. With a roar, Jaeman sprang forward, low to the ground like a charging predator. He launched himself headfirst into the swarm of assassins. Aegon stood stunned for a second, nearly missing the rhythm of Jaeman's charge. Snapping to action, he raised his round shield and closed in on Jaeman's left flank, holding tight to cover him. The archers hidden in the shadows resumed their assault the moment the battle reignited, loosing a flurry of arrows, but Aegon blocked them all, holding the line with his shield. What happened next showed Aegon what it truly meant to face a monster in battle. The twin blades in Jaeman's hands moved like a storm of steel, sweeping and cutting in every direction. As he clashed with the assassins, the ring of steel on steel filled the air like the rhythmic pounding of a forge, constant, deafening. His movements were fluid and precise, his dominant hand sword slashing in wide, powerful arcs, while the reverse-gripped blade flicked, dragged, sliced, and cut in seamless rhythm. Every motion was controlled chaos, brutal yet elegant. It felt like Jaeman was performing a deadly form of martial ballet, a dazzling, blood-soaked dance across the battlefield. He was a sword in bloom, beautiful and terrifying all at once. With Aegon at his side intercepting arrows and covering his blind spots, Jaeman could fight freely, unrestrained. And when he did, he absolutely overwhelmed his enemies. He wasn't defending, he was chasing them down, cutting through multiple attackers at once. The way he moved, it was as if these assassins were nothing but helpless prey. Aegon had to maintain a careful distance just to avoid being caught by Jaeman's wide, sweeping sword arcs. At the same time, he noticed something else. Even though Jaeman was fighting like a wild beast, his movements remained anchored around the carriage. He wasn't nearly as reckless as he appeared. He was calculating every step. Clang, clang, 2 crisp impacts rang out, an assassin's iron sword snapped clean in half. The last one still resisting took a vicious slash to the thigh. He crumpled, half kneeling, shrieking in pain. A moment later, Jaeman's dominant hand blade came down in a clean arc, severing his head from his shoulders. With that final blow, the tide turned. The assassins, those who were still alive, finally broke. In just a few brutal minutes, nearly 10 of their number had been cut down. Such staggering losses would shake even the boldest killers. Demon, monster, they shouted in panic, stumbling backward. Once they'd put enough distance between themselves and Jaeman, they saw he wasn't pursuing, so they turned and fled into the darkness, vanishing within moments. Aegon was bent over, gasping for breath, hands braced on his knees. It took him a long while to recover. His round shield was riddled with arrows, over 20 of them. The chaos had finally quieted. Moonlight spilled over the blood-slicked square, serene and cold. The scene before him was grim and beautiful, a battlefield painted in red, a rose in full bloom of violence and death. Tap, tap. Jaeman walked over, boots squelching through blood as he stepped closer to Aegon. Aegon looked up at him. Jaeman's face was streaked with blood, lines of it smeared across his features like war paint, making him look even more fearsome in the pale glow of the moon. Jaemin extended a hand. Aegon grabbed it and hauled himself to his feet. You're not safe here anymore. Let's get you back to Targaryen lands. If you'd like to support my work and unlock advanced chapters, you can follow me on Patreon. Up to 20 chapters ahead for now. Patreon.com, BlurryDream. BlurryDream creators' thoughts. 2 comments 0 vote. Chapter 9. Aegon's terrifying gift for archery. In that case, I guess I'll have to hang around the family estate for a few more days. Originally, Aegon hadn't planned to move back into House Targaryen so soon. Being outside the estate gave him far more freedom and flexibility to build up his own forces and loyal followers. After all, he intended to contend for the position of head of the house. If he was going to be reborn into this world, why settle for being second to anyone? Aegon let out a quiet sigh and looked back at his blackstone tower across the square. It stood there silently, looming in the moonlight. He couldn't help but wonder, were there still traps waiting for him inside? Jaemin let out a hearty laugh and threw an arm around Aegon's shoulders. We're family now, no need to be so formal. That easygoing nature of his was contagious. Aegon's heavy mood began to ease. The coachman turned the carriage around, and the two of them climbed in, leaving the square behind. In the main hall of the Targaryen stronghold atop Targaryen Hill. Jaemin sat on a bench as Daenerys carefully clamped the remaining arrowhead lodged in his body with a pair of tongs. With a sharp tug and a wet pop, she yanked it free. The dragon taming tournament is just a month away. Anar's face was stormy as he scolded Jaemin harshly. Don't you understand? If a dragon tamer is injured during the taming, it could lead to the dragon viewing them with contempt. It drastically lowers the chance of success. Why in the world did you charge in like that? The more he spoke, the angrier he got, his voice rising. You're sabotaging your own future. Sacrificing your chances for someone who hasn't even bonded with a dragon yet. I've told you time and time again, don't go trusting people so easily. With a temperament like yours, how am I supposed to trust the future of our entire house to you? Jaemin scratched his head with his right hand and replied calmly, I mean, we just hit it off, you know. And in that moment, if I hadn't stepped in, he'd be dead. Simple as that. Anar's lips trembled with fury. It was obvious, this fool of a son hadn't listened to a single word he'd ever said. Does it still hurt, brother? Daenerys asked gently as she wrapped the bandage. It's just a dragonfly bite. Nothing serious, Jaemin said with a grin, then stood and turned to face Anar with a rare seriousness in his expression. Father, this really is just a scratch. It doesn't affect me at all. And that Aegon guy, he's the real deal. I couldn't just stand there and watch him die. Think about it. We need talent now more than ever. Our two vassal houses, Velaryon and Celtigar, don't exactly have any rising stars in this generation. Once we relocate to Dragonstone, you're not seriously expecting me to conquer Westeros all on my own, are you? HMPH. Don't risk your life like that again. Anar shot him a hard glare, clearly still frustrated. But in the end, he could only throw down that one warning and walk away. Jaemin could only call after him, got it. The guest wing of House Targaryen sat near the kennels, but Jaemin had arranged for Aegon's room to be on the 5th floor, far enough from the hunting hounds and wild beasts that the smell wouldn't be an issue. Aegon lounged on the bed, comfortably stretched out, projecting the game interface in front of him. He pulled up Jaemin's profile from the database. Opening the talent section, he saw talent, strong arms, courageous, true dragonblood, Dragonseed. He tapped into the details. D rank, bravery, increases base vitality to 125% of the average human. D rank, strong arms, increases forearm and wrist strength to 150% of the average human. Double D rank talents. Courageous had boosted Jaemin's vitality stat to an incredible 96 to 16 points higher than Aegon's own. And strong arms gave him the raw strength to dual-wield heavy swords. A natural berserker build. No wonder he fought like a beast. From everything he'd seen and experienced today, Aegon had come to a conclusion. Jaemin was the kind of loyal, big-hearted guy who, if born in ancient China, would have been either a roaming champion of justice or a feared outlaw king ruling his own territory. Someone you could feel safe calling, brother. With that thought, he closed the panel. Aegon pulled out the note that the beggar had slipped into his hand earlier. Who had warned him about the danger? It seemed the guild's internal traitors weren't entirely united. There were still people secretly on his side. But why had he become a target in the first place? What had he done to provoke such a move? Aegon couldn't figure it out. In the end, with no answers in sight, he set those worries aside and fell into a deep sleep. Early the next morning, just as the sky began to lighten, a loud knocking erupted at Aegon's door, echoing sharply through the quiet corridor. Still half asleep, Aegon shuffled to the door in his slippers and cracked it open. Standing outside was Jimin, dressed in a gray training outfit. Stop sleeping. Get up, we're going to train, Jimin said bluntly, stepping in and dragging Aegon out of the room without giving him a chance to argue. Train for what? Aegon yawned, mumbling groggily. Breakfast first. I'll explain on the way, Jimin said, tugging him along. You know, during the dragon taming tournament, if several people want the same dragon, guess what happens? Aegon started waking up. They fight. HMPH. Jimin let out a cold snort. They kill. That way, there's no one left to fight you for the dragon. I used to think someone with your build must have had some kind of warrior training. But based on what I saw last night, I'm not even sure you could beat Daenerys. I'm a merchant, not a warlord, Aegon replied helplessly. Exactly. And with just a month left before the tournament, we need to drill your combat skills hard. Otherwise, you'll just end up handing your head over. Jimin's tone was dead serious. All right, you're the boss. Aegon nodded, then remembered the thought that had been troubling him the night before. About my guild. Father's already sent someone to investigate, Jimin said. We should hear back in a day or two. As for the person who slipped you that warning last night, it's likely one of your guild's 4 senior officers. We'll send someone to make contact. As they talked, they arrived at the dining hall. Daenerys sat at the table in a silk dress, elegantly nibbling on bread. Several young boys and girls were also at the table. Jimin introduced them one by one. They were all Targaryen cousins. Near the main table, a long bench held several teenagers with various hair colors, quietly eating their breakfast. These were the bastards of House Targaryen. After breakfast, Aegon changed into a standard training uniform and followed Jimin to the same training ground where he had first met Jimin and his sister. Jimin personally took charge of Aegon's training. Don't keep your body so tense, especially your shoulders. Relax. Come on, move like this. Jimin demonstrated how to loosen up his shoulders. Aegon quickly followed along, gently rolling his shoulders. At the same time, he activated his talent chip and set up a new training program. First, your grip and stance have to be right, Jimin said, lowering into a slight crouch with his sword held near his midsection. What I'm teaching you now is the Valyrian military sword stance. It's highly practical. Later, it branches into mounted dragon combat, what we call Valyrian dragon lance technique. A prompt sounded in Aegon's mind. Chip. Learning task created. Actively analyzing and recording all sword techniques demonstrated by Jimin. Real-time posture correction enabled. Operation successful. Chip will consume 0.1 destiny points per second during task duration. Aegon quickly checked his interface. He still had over 80 destiny points, enough for combat training, at least. Mimicking Jimin's stance, Aegon asked, was the two-sword technique you used last night part of this system too? While smoothly shifting between stances, Jimin replied, no, that was my own take on dual wielding, an adaptation with some water dancer moves mixed in. I call it the Valyrian inverted cross dual blades. What, you want to learn it? Aegon quickly shook his head and gave a wry smile. Swinging a heavy sword with one hand. I don't have your wrist strength. Jimin chuckled and raised his voice. Watch carefully, I'm about to show you the 14 basic strikes of Valyrian military swordsmanship. Basic strike. Downward slash. With a shout, Jimin's longsword cut downward in one smooth arc. Aegon followed along, managing to keep up thanks to the chip's guidance. Basic strike. Horizontal slash. As he demonstrated, Jimin kept a close eye on Aegon's movements. When he saw Aegon replicate the move correctly, he didn't look particularly surprised. In truth, Aegon's sword talent was only slightly above average, at most, the kind of level that might earn him a squad leader's position in the army. Basic strike. Heavy blow. Next, the 12 major variation strikes: elbow strike, curved strike, crossing slash, slide cut, rebound slash, thrust strike, short cut. Jimin broke down each move of the Valyrian military sword style with patience and precision, explaining every detail. Aegon trained with equal focus. With the chip's assistance, the learning process was demanding, but manageable. Next to the training grounds stood a 2-story pavilion, meant for nobles to rest, eat, or rehydrate between sessions. On the second-floor balcony, Anar stood silently, watching his son below as he instructed Aegon. From time to time, he nodded slightly. His wife and daughter, Daenerys, stood beside him. Father, Aegon seems to have a real talent for swordsmanship, Daenerys said softly, leaning on the railing. Brother only has to show him once, and he remembers. He barely makes any mistakes during practice. He's just a bit above average, Anar replied dismissively. If he ends up facing dragonfire, it'll still be over in one breath. Daenerys's eyes lit up suddenly. Looks like they're going to practice archery. She had seen Aegon and Jaeman set their swords aside and start walking toward the range. Anar raised his chin slightly. Last night, Jaeman said Aegon used an iron shield to block over 20 arrows fired by a Rhoynar longbowman in the dark. That's not something just anyone can do. He knows archery too, Anar's wife asked curiously. Let's wait and see, Anar replied, noncommittal. At the archery range. Try this 100-pound draw, Jaeman said, handing Aegon a longbow. Aegon took the bow calmly and carefully fitted the leather guard over his thumb. He pulled an arrow from the quiver, knocked it to the string, and fixed his gaze on a target 50 meters away. Thrum. The bowstring let out a soft vibration. The arrow shot forward like a winged missile released from the string. As Aegon expected, it struck dead center. Once he activated the chip's assistance, the moment he knocked an arrow, a red cross would appear marking the predicted point of impact. All he had to do was align the cross with the center of the target. Near perfect accuracy was all but guaranteed. Not bad. Must be your lucky day, Jaeman said, raising an eyebrow. He could tell from Aegon's stiff and awkward stance that he was a novice with the bow, yet he still landed a bullseye. Though he joked, he was genuinely shocked by Aegon's potential. Again, Jaeman handed him another arrow. Aegon took it casually and loosed it without even aiming. By the time he drew, the chip had already analyzed the wind, humidity, and predicted trajectory. Whoosh. Another bullseye. This time, the arrow split the previous one down the middle. Jaeman's mouth dropped slightly. He handed over another arrow. One more. Whoosh. Without suspense, the new arrow again split the last, still hitting the bullseye. Back on the balcony, Anar had witnessed the whole thing, every uncanny shot. His hands unconsciously clenched the railing tight. In the Freehold, archery carried a very different and uniquely vital significance compared to other martial disciplines. After all, no matter how refined your swordplay or spear techniques were, they meant nothing against the massive, thick-skinned bodies of dragons. Archery was different. Archery, true, divine archery, could slay dragons. 3 comments 0 vote. Chapter 10. Betrothal. Aegon's archery, if paired with one of those dragon-hunting ballistae the Rhoynar make. The thought alone made Anar shudder involuntarily as the image formed in his mind. There was no doubt. Aegon could become a devastating weapon for the family. With that realization, Anar found himself quite pleased with Jaeman's risky decision the previous night. He continued to watch Jaeman and Aegon down in the training yard, then turned and instructed the black-clad steward behind him. Have the guards notified. Make sure they understand. Aegon's talent for archery is not to be spoken of. Yes, my lord, the steward replied respectfully. In the blink of an eye, 3 days had passed. Back in the training yard, Aegon was fully focused, sparring with Jaeman. The two exchanged blows in rapid succession, Aegon on the offensive, his strikes sharp and aggressive. But no matter how fierce his assault, Jaeman always managed to counter smoothly. He kept one hand tucked behind his back, relaxed and composed, exuding quiet confidence. Aegon sighed inwardly. Even with the chip's help, the gap between our swordsmanship is still obvious. He drew his sword back to his center and launched a precise Valyrian military swordsmanship variation, an upward thrust, but Jaeman remained unfazed. With a subtle shift of his feet and a slight turn of his body, he easily dodged the incoming blow. Jaeman then deftly twisted his iron sword, letting the blade slide along Aegon's with practiced ease. With a light tap, clang, Aegon's sword was knocked clean from his grip, landing a short distance away. Not bad, Jaeman said with a smile. You've basically learned the core of this technique. With more practice and a bit of adaptability, you'll be well on your way to becoming a capable fighter. Aegon gave a wry smile, rubbing his right palm, which still tingled from the impact. Jaeman's got a real habit, he just can't help showing off like some aristocratic poser. Just then, a voice rang out from beyond the training yard. Lord Aegon, Prince Jaeman. The Lord requests your presence in the reception hall. He has matters to discuss with you. Looks like your guild business has finally turned something up, Jaeman said with a slight grin. Aegon nodded silently, bent down to retrieve his fallen sword, then casually flicked it into the air. It spun in a clean arc, landing perfectly on the distant weapon rack with a metallic clink. Let's go, Aegon said flatly. Inside the main hall of the stronghold, Anar sat at the head of the room, engaged in quiet conversation with a middle-aged Miranese man whose hair was braided in the local style. As Aegon entered, he immediately recognized the man, Ramon, head of the slave division at the Dragon's Treasure Guild. My lord, Ramon said, bowing low upon seeing him. After a moment's thought, Aegon asked, was it you who sent the beggar with the warning note that night? Ramon nodded without hesitation. Yes. At the time, a number of mercenaries had gathered outside the guild's headquarters. I studied their behavior carefully and concluded that they were lying in wait, only for you. Thank you, Aegon said, his tone softening. You saved my life, lifting me from a slave to a free man. For that, I'll spend the rest of my life repaying you, Ramon said solemnly. Aegon stepped forward and gave him a firm pat on the shoulder. Seeing they had finished their exchange, Anar spoke. I've just spoken with Ramon. Based on the information gathered by the spies I placed these past few days, we can be fairly certain the one who betrayed the Dragon's Treasure Guild was your finance steward, Bruce. It has to be him, Ramon added. The Dragon's Treasure trade route has been stable for over a century. Every danger spot, sea monsters, krakens, you name it, has been carefully avoided. The odds of an accident are incredibly slim. And the trade routes and maps are top-level secrets. Only the former guild master and the chief financial officer had access to that chart. Aegon's brow furrowed deeply. So he did it for money. It's not that simple, Anar said gravely. The day after your assassination attempt, Bruce secretly traveled to the House Aurelian estate. The Aurelians are one of the permanent council members of the 14 Flames. This goes all the way to the Dragonlord families. Aegon said in shock. I suspect your Blackstone Tower is hiding something, Anar said, watching him carefully. All I know is that the tower has been passed down in my adoptive father's family for generations, hundreds of years now, Aegon replied, thinking back. Anar stroked his beard thoughtfully. It's always been called the Dragon's Treasure. Treasure, it might very well be that something was buried beneath it, an inheritance from one of the Dragonlord bloodlines. Aegon let out a quiet sigh. Right now, all he wanted was to settle down, raise children, and continue his bloodline. The last thing he needed was another mess. We Targaryens are selling off our holdings in the Freehold, Anar said after a pause. We're preparing to leave the Valyrian Peninsula, we don't want unnecessary trouble. He studied Aegon's face for a moment. Seeing no strong reaction, he continued. How about this, let me go to House Aurelian for you. I'll arrange to sell the Blackstone Tower to them in exchange for certain benefits. In a few years, the Valyrian Peninsula will be destroyed. They'll die just the same. Aegon said nothing, deep in thought. He didn't answer right away. Anar thought Aegon was reluctant to give up the foundation he had built. How about this? The family will offer you some compensation. What do you think? What kind of compensation? Seeing Aegon respond, Anar secretly let out a breath of relief. Aegon now held considerable weight in his heart, and he didn't want a deep rift to form between him and the family. I heard you're asking Ramon to help you find a woman with true dragon blood. Anar asked. Yes, I'm not young anymore, and I've been thinking about finding a wife to carry on the bloodline. You know my current status, someone like me would never be considered by the Dragonlord families. And I don't want to marry a woman from another race. Doing so could gradually dilute the purity of our family's dragon blood over time. Aegon spoke seriously. Anar nodded in agreement. There are still a few maidens of marriageable age in House Targaryen. Aside from Daenerys, you can choose one to marry. What do you think? Jaeman quietly let out a sigh of relief when he heard his father exclude his sister Daenerys. Family head, all women of marriageable age? Aegon asked to confirm. Yes, Anar nodded. I want to, Aegon said. Anar was briefly stunned. He raised his hand and tapped Aegon on the head, then agreed. All right, 2. Valyria's marriage system allowed polygamy, so it wasn't unreasonable for Aegon to ask for another. Anar himself had taken multiple wives. Evening quietly arrived. In the spacious and brightly lit main hall of the castle, House Targaryen held a small ball to celebrate Aegon's upcoming marriage. Aegon sat upright at the head table, quietly sipping his wine as he waited for what was to come. This was a private ball held solely for Aegon. Jaeman and the other male members of House Targaryen were absent. Only the black-clad steward Farlan and a few cupbearers served at the event. Aegon gently lifted his wine glass and took a small sip of red wine. Then, the black-clad steward Farlan led a group of about a dozen young Targaryen women gracefully into the hall. Some of the girls shyly covered half of their faces with fans, while others carried themselves with poise, hands folded elegantly before their waists, radiating grace and decorum. Farlan stood at the front and introduced them. Among these maidens are daughters of the main and cadet branches, as well as bastard daughters of the family head and Targaryen kin. All of them carry noble blood. Lord Aegon, you may choose 2 to be your wives. Aegon set down his wine cup and asked, "May I know their identities?" Farland shook his head. "Everything is left to fate. Whether you choose from the main branch, cadet branch, or the bastards, it's all destiny's design." Aegon nodded in understanding. As the young women stepped into the hall with graceful steps, they curiously observed the man before them. Before coming in, their fathers had explained the details of this arranged marriage. A future true dragon, soon to participate in the dragon taming tournament, had been matched with them by Anar, the head of House Targaryen. For the bastard daughters, this was a rare opportunity to leap across class lines. Becoming the wife of a true dragon was a union even many noble daughters of the main line could only dream of. They instinctively stood a little taller, subtly presenting their assets, eyes filled with anticipation. The noble daughters of the main line were also quietly observing Aegon. A true dragon with great potential was no less attractive to them. They remained composed, watching Aegon discreetly, waiting for his choice. The maidens stood in an elegant row, like budding blossoms waiting to bloom. Aegon stepped forward, feeling a rush of excitement. "Finally, I'm about to start my own family." Once the house was established, the game system would reward him with an achievement bonus, and the main storyline would officially begin. He walked to the far left and stopped before a delicate and alluring young woman. Her appearance and figure were both outstanding. She wore a flowing pale pink gown that trailed to the floor. Her full, well-shaped chest filled out the elegant silk dress perfectly, exuding a subtle allure. "May I have this dance, my lady?" Aegon gave a slight bow and extended his right hand. She smiled softly, dimples forming at the corners of her lips, and placed her slender, pale fingers gently in Aegon's palm. Her touch was soft and light. Steward Farland introduced her from the side. "This is Lady Daenerys." Aegon's talent chip immediately began its analysis. Daenerys Targaryen. Attributes. Politics. 76. Strategy. 89. Military tactics. 15. Mental strength. 73. Vitality. 57. Talents. E rank. Pure blood. Fertility plus 10%. Offspring vitality plus 5%. E rank. Supple as silk. Physical flexibility plus 50%. E rank. Strong desire. Physiological needs plus 80%. Fertility plus 15%. True dragon blood. Dragonseed. Charm plus 2.5. Fire resistance increased to 60%. Mental resistance minus 55%. 55% chance to tame dragons. Skills. If you'd like to support my work and unlock advanced chapters, you can follow me on Patreon. Up to 20 chapters ahead for now. P. Atrian Com, BlurryDream. BlurryDream creators' thoughts.